My name is Marlene Pierce. I raised my daughter with everything I had, and still somehow I became the villain in her story. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It started on a Tuesday night, the kind of quiet, uneventful evening that shouldn't carry any weight. My daughter Amelia had invited me over for dinner. She said she missed me. That alone should have warmed my heart, but instead I felt a chill when I read the message. Amelia doesn't usually miss me, at least not in the last 2 years. But I said yes, of course, because no matter what kind of distance has grown between us, I am still her mother. I still remembered the little girl who held my hand when crossing the street, who cried into my blouse during thunderstorms. I still hoped she was somewhere in there. Her house was warm, tasteful, pristine, a kind of curated perfection that somehow felt clinical. She greeted me with a quick, polite hug. Her smile was pleasant but didn't reach her eyes, and I noticed she didn't look me in the eyes for more than 2 seconds. We sat down to eat. Roasted salmon, a quinoa salad, wine, all neatly plated. She even folded the napkins, which was unlike her. "I'm glad you came," she said. I nodded. "I'm glad you asked." Then silence. I watched her pick at her food, eyes darting occasionally toward her phone. I asked about her work. She brushed it off with same as always. I asked about her husband, Tyler. "He's working late." I asked about her latest art project. She paused, then said, "I haven't really painted lately." That's when I knew something was wrong. Amelia never stops painting. Even in college, when she was broke and heartbroken, she painted with ketchup and coffee on scrap napkins. If she wasn't painting, something was broken inside her. And I couldn't help but wonder, had I done it? The dinner ended quickly. Too quickly. I offered to help clean up, but she insisted almost too sharply that I leave it. I kissed her cheek goodnight and walked back to my car under a dark sky filled with clouds that didn't rain, just threatened to. I sat in my car for a long time before driving off, just thinking. There was something about that evening I couldn't shake. Not the food, not the silence. It was the way she looked at me like I was a stranger. When I got home, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I pulled out the old memory box. Photos, letters, Amelia's childhood drawings. There was one she made when she was 6, a crayon picture of the two of us holding hands under a sun with a smiley face. It said, "Me and Mommy forever." I held it in my lap and stared at it, wondering how a forever could feel so fractured. That night, I dreamed I was at her wedding again. Only in the dream, she never turned to look at me. I sat in the front row, clapping, smiling, crying, and she never even glanced my way. I woke up with tears already drying on my cheeks. The next morning, I called her. No answer. I texted, "Dinner was lovely. Hope you're okay." No reply. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, I decided to drop off some homemade scones at her place, something she loved as a girl. I figured I could leave them at the door. She wasn't home. But her car was in the driveway. Something didn't feel right. I know that sounds intrusive, but as a mother, you don't stop worrying even when you're told to. I walked around back thinking maybe she was gardening. I peeked in the windows. Nothing. I knocked again. Nothing. I was about to leave when I noticed the guest bedroom window cracked open. She used to forget to lock that one. Just like when she was 16 and sneaking out to parties. I stood there torn. It wasn't right to enter. But something gnawed at me. A deep fear. A worry I couldn't name. I pushed the window open and climbed in. The room smelled like lavender and books. I tiptoed down the hallway, not knowing what I was even looking for. I wasn't trying to snoop. I just wanted to know if she was okay. If she was still herself. I paused outside her bedroom door. That's when I noticed it, a drawer slightly ajar in her writing desk. Inside was a printed document neatly folded, and beside it a notepad the kind lawyers use. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. And in one breath I went from a confused mother to a woman betrayed. My name was on those papers, mortgage documents, co-signature, financial statements. But I had never signed them, at least not knowingly. The handwriting looked like mine, but the date, the timing, 2 years ago, right around the time she stopped calling me. I sat down on her bed, the paper trembling in my hand. My daughter had forged my name. She had bought this house, this perfectly curated life, by tying herself to my name, my credit, my retirement, and never said a word. Worse, she had been living in a lie she let me praise. I had told friends I was proud of her for achieving so much so young. I had defended her when others said she seemed distant. I had covered for a daughter who was rewriting our relationship while standing next to me, and it was only just beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the window turning into shapes I couldn't name. The paper I'd found in Amelia's drawer was burned into my mind, not just the forged signature, but what it meant. She hadn't just used me, she had erased my choice in the process. Morning came like a slap of cold water. I made my usual cup of tea, but it tasted like ash. I didn't even finish it. My hands shook as I set it down. What kind of person forges their own mother's signature? What kind of daughter does that? But the bigger question kept looping in my mind: why? It wasn't like I wouldn't have helped her. I've always helped her when her first car broke down, when she needed money for grad school, when she wanted to move to New York and chase her gallery dream. I sold my mother's necklace to help her get that first apartment. She didn't even need to lie. That's what hurt the most. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned out the pantry, rearranged my books, watered the plants even though they didn't need it. But I kept replaying every phone call, every odd silence, every avoidance over the past 2 years. Her voice had changed, gradually warmer when she wanted something, colder when I asked questions. And I realized this hadn't just been a one-time lie. It had been a slow build, a quiet pulling away. A wall she built brick by brick while smiling at me through the cracks. I called her again. Straight to voicemail. I left a message: Amelia, I came by the house. You weren't home. I found something, and I think we need to talk. Please call me. I love you. I didn't hear back. A week passed. Then 2. That's when something else happened. A memory hit me like a slap. I'd signed something 2 years ago. It was during a rushed visit. Amelia had come over in a flurry saying her gallery needed more paperwork. It's just some boring credit stuff, she'd laughed. You know how bureaucracies are. Can you sign this for me, Mom? She had distracted me with questions about my high school reunion while pushing the paper in front of me. I hadn't read it carefully. That was my signature. That had to be what she used. And yet, I didn't feel guilty. I felt tricked. Betrayal doesn't always come with yelling and slammed doors. Sometimes it comes with soft voices and warm hugs. Sometimes it comes wearing your daughter's favorite perfume and calling you Mom. I drove by her house again. I didn't go in this time. I just sat across the street watching the light in her window. I saw her silhouette move across the curtains. She was there. She was choosing not to answer me, and that hurt more than anything. Later that week, I was at the grocery store when I ran into an old neighbor of hers, Mrs. Callahan, a kind widow who used to bring Amelia cookies during her first year in the neighborhood. "Oh, I haven't seen you around in a while," she said. "Amelia told me you two had a falling out." I froze. She said what she said: you'd been difficult. Controlling, I think she said. That you didn't respect her independence. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know how else to respond. Mrs. Callahan gave me a strange look and patted my arm. "I'm sure you meant well, dear. Children grow up." I stood there in the cereal aisle, blinking back tears, the boxes swimming before my eyes. I wasn't just the victim of a forgery, I was being rewritten. To the outside world, I wasn't the mother who raised her alone after her father left. I wasn't the one who stayed up during fevers, who sat through ballet rehearsals and late-night panic attacks. I was now difficult, controlling, unwelcome. I paid for my groceries and left half of them behind by accident. When I got home, I looked at the photo on my nightstand, me and Amelia at her college graduation. Her arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling so wide. Now I didn't know what was real in that photo. Was it joy? Or was it just her playing the part of the daughter I wanted while building a truth of her own in secret? That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and said it out loud for the first time. My daughter is lying to me. The words sounded foreign, like I'd stolen someone else's sentence. But it was true. And once you speak a truth out loud, you can't take it back. You can't stuff it down. It starts living in your bones. The next day, I pulled out a notebook and started writing everything I remembered from the past 2 years. Every shift in her tone, every excuse she gave, every phone call she didn't return. I wasn't sure why I was doing it, maybe to prove to myself I hadn't imagined it all. Maybe because I felt like I was losing my mind. Somewhere in the middle of that notebook, I wrote a sentence that made my hand stop cold. Maybe she's protecting something. I stared at it. What if it wasn't malice? What if it was shame? Or fear? But fear of what? What was so awful that she had to hide it? Not just from the world, but from me. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to her house again. But this time, I wasn't just looking for signs. I was looking for the truth. Even if it hurt. Even if it shattered me. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe an explanation. A note. A crack in the story she had built so carefully, one that would let me crawl inside and finally understand. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Amelia was at work, her car gone. The same window in the guest bedroom was cracked again, just slightly. Maybe she had forgotten. Maybe it was her way of leaving a door open, a silent plea for me to come in. Or maybe I was just telling myself that to feel less like an intruder. The room was quiet, still smelling faintly of lavender and something else, like old paint. I moved through the hallway slowly. I didn't touch anything. I just looked. It struck me how curated her life looked now, perfectly aligned picture frames, minimalist furniture, spotless floors. But the house felt hollow, as if no one really lived there. Then I reached her bedroom. I hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, and inside the light from the window cast long shadows across the floor. It was the same room I had sat in 2 weeks earlier, holding the mortgage papers like a guilty secret. But this time, I saw something I hadn't before. A small, dark wooden cabinet in the corner. Old, out of place. Something I recognized immediately. It was my father's. She had taken it from the attic of my old house back when we moved her into college. I had forgotten all about it. It used to sit in his office full of stamps and ink pads and old receipts. I remembered the little brass lock on the top drawer. And it was locked now. I knelt in front of it, running my fingers over the surface. Dust clung to the edges. She hadn't used it in a while. But I noticed something. One of the drawers wasn't aligned properly. Just a tiny shift. A sliver of something sticking out. A folded piece of paper. I slipped it out, careful not to tear it. It was an email. Printed. From a woman named Sandra J. Wellington Esker. Subject line: Re-POA confirmation power of attorney. My blood turned cold. The email thanked Amelia for submitting the revised notarized documents for POA renewal. It mentioned my name multiple times. It confirmed my address, my date of birth, the signature date. I flipped the page. There was a scan of the document attached. And there, plain as day, was my signature again. Only I hadn't signed it. The date was barely a month after that day she rushed into my house, talking a mile a minute, distracting me with stories, waving a clipboard in front of me with just a small form for the gallery application. She hadn't needed gallery access. She needed control. With this document, she had the legal right to access my financial records, my retirement account, my healthcare decisions. She didn't just borrow my name to get a house. She had given herself the legal keys to my life. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. Why? Why would she do this? I wanted to believe she had a reason, a desperate one. But everything she'd done so far had been so quiet, so measured. This wasn't panic. This was planning. I placed the email back exactly as I found it. My hands were trembling. My knees ached as I stood up. I turned to leave and knocked over a stack of sketchbooks on her dresser. They spilled open. Pages and pages of charcoal drawings, abstract, messy, emotional. But in the margins, there were notes, scribbled lines like confessions, anger, shame. She always made me feel small. I want to be free of her voice in my head. What if she finds out what I did? It wasn't wrong. She would have said yes if she loved me. I had to. I sat on the edge of her bed and held my face in my hands. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about me, about how she saw me. I wasn't the mother who stayed up nights when she was sick. I wasn't the woman who packed her lunches, wrote her encouragement notes, saved every birthday card she ever made. In her eyes, I was the cage, the voice in her head, the one she had to escape. And she had escaped. By erasing me from the equation and signing over my presence as if it were just paperwork. I don't know how long I sat there. The sky outside was growing darker when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Amelia. I bolted up. I had no plan. No script. My heart wanted to confront her, scream at her, hold her, beg for answers all at once. But I did what I always did when overwhelmed. I left. I slipped out the back window just before the front door opened. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see her face. Not yet. Not until I knew what I was going to say. Not until I knew who I was now that the person I loved most had stolen pieces of me and then rewritten the story as if I had handed them over. I drove home in silence. No radio. No thoughts even. Just the image of those scribbled words echoing through my mind. She would have said yes if she loved me. What kind of love had I given her, that she thought theft was the only way to be heard? And what kind of daughter had I raised, that she thought I was the enemy? It took me 3 days to build the courage to call her again. Not to accuse her. Not yet. But to give her one last chance to tell me the truth. To offer the honesty I once believed was the foundation of our relationship. I dialed her number late at night when the silence of my home was thick enough to hear my heartbeat. She picked up after the third ring. Mom. Her voice was flat. Not cold, just guarded. I was hoping we could talk, I said as gently as I could. In person. Just you and me. She hesitated. I could hear her breathing. Then, okay. Tomorrow evening. Come to the house. She didn't say she missed me. She didn't ask how I was. But it was something. The next evening, I stood on her doorstep with nothing but my coat and a lump in my throat. When she opened the door, she didn't smile. Her eyes flicked to my face like she was searching for something. Fear, maybe. Or restraint. We sat in the living room. The same room where we used to watch movies together when she was a teenager. She always curled up on the floor with a blanket and used my leg as a pillow. Now she sat stiffly on the opposite couch. Legs crossed, arms folded. I didn't waste time. I saw the mortgage documents, I said, and the power of attorney papers. A shadow crossed her face. You went through my things? She asked, voice clipped. I did. I didn't apologize, because I knew something was wrong. And you weren't telling me. She looked away. So it's true, I pushed. You used my name, my signature, to buy this house. She stood abruptly and walked to the window. For a moment, I thought she might scream, but she didn't. She just stared outside. I needed it, she finally said. I needed a place of my own. I couldn't qualify on my own. And I knew you'd never say yes. That stopped me. Why wouldn't I? I asked, genuinely stunned. Have I ever said no to helping you, ever? She turned toward me and the mask cracked just slightly. Because I didn't want to owe you, she whispered. Her words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't want you to hold it over me. Like everything else. Everything else, I echoed. Amelia. I've never once. You don't even realize it, she said, her voice trembling now. You say things like, I gave up so much for you, or I worked double shifts to pay for your school. And it's true. I know it's true. But do you know how small that makes me feel? Like I'll never be enough to pay you back. Like my life is built on a guilt debt. I stared at her. It wasn't rage I felt. It was heartbreak. I had never said those things to make her feel guilty. I said them to show her love, to remind her that she was worth it. But in her mind, I had become a creditor, not a mother. So you forged my name instead of talking to me? I asked softly. She looked down. I thought you'd say yes and then remind me of it forever. I walked over to her. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood close enough for her to see the pain in my eyes. You don't need to lie to earn space in this world, Amelia, I said. Not from me. Never from me. She blinked rapidly but didn't cry. I just wanted something of my own, she said. My name on the deed. My life. Without a history attached. I nodded even as my heart cracked in places I didn't know existed. You have every right to want your own life, but not by stealing mine. Silence. A long one. Then she said the thing that split me open. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From becoming part of something you didn't understand, she said. From a version of me you wouldn't accept. What version is that? But she didn't answer. Instead, she changed the subject. I can add your name to the deed if that's what you want. I'll undo the POA. I'll fix it. And that was when I realized she wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. She thought this was about control, or money, or property. But for me, it was about trust. And trust, once fractured, doesn't come back with a paperwork reversal. I shook my head. I don't want the house, I said. I want my daughter back. She looked up at me, her eyes suddenly soft, vulnerable. I don't know if I can be her anymore. I nodded slowly. I think you already left her behind. I walked out of that house with no anger in my steps, just a heaviness I couldn't name. The kind that lives in your ribs and doesn't leave no matter how deep you breathe. The porch light stayed on behind me, but I never looked back. That night in bed, I lay awake thinking not of the documents or the lies, but of a little girl in yellow pajamas who once curled beside me and asked, "Will you always be mine, mommy?" And how I had answered without hesitation, forever and ever. But forever doesn't always look like you expect. Sometimes it arrives in a house built on a lie and a truth that breaks you. I didn't expect her to call me again. After that night, I thought the silence would stretch on forever, a new normal. A mother and daughter walking parallel lines, too wounded to cross back over. But 3 days later, her number lit up on my screen. For a full minute, I just stared at it. Then I answered. I've scheduled a meeting, she said without greeting. With the bank. To reverse the power of attorney, and to update the house title. Her voice was clipped, transactional, like a business call. Okay, I replied. When Friday, 10 a.m., I'll text the address. She hung up. No apology. No thank you. No emotion. But I showed up. I wore a blazer, something I hadn't done in years. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to armor myself. Maybe I wanted to remind both of us who I had been before she turned me into a footnote in her story. The bank office was a glass tomb, sleek and cold. Amelia was already seated inside a meeting room flipping through papers. She looked calm. Too calm. The representative, a young man named Evan, greeted us both like we were signing mortgage options, not untying a knot of betrayal. "I have the new documentation ready," he said. "Ms. Pierce, you'll be removed from the power of attorney agreement, and Amelia will file an affidavit acknowledging the misuse." I nodded. My signature was neat, but my hand trembled as I lowered the pen. When it was done, Amelia stood up without a word. "I thought we could talk," I said before she could walk out. She paused. "In private." Evan gave a polite nod and left the room. She sat again reluctantly. "What else is there to say?" she asked. I took a breath. "You used my trust. You turned me into a tool, and you told people I was controlling, cruel, that I made you feel small." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't say you were cruel," she muttered. "Just overwhelming." I nodded slowly. "I can live with your version of me, but I want to understand something." She crossed her arms. "Why did you really do it, Amelia?" She said nothing for a long time. Then she leaned back and whispered, "Because I didn't want to owe you. I didn't want to be you." That was the dagger. Not that she forged my name. Not even that she told others I was overbearing. But that she saw my life. The sacrifices, the nights I cried quietly in the kitchen over unpaid bills, the years of working 2 jobs, and all she took from it was who I became. And she didn't want to become that. "Being me wasn't a curse," I said quietly. She scoffed. "It looked like one." I stared at her. This woman I had carried in my body for 9 months, rocked to sleep every night for years, watched grow into someone so sharp and distant I barely recognized her. "Do you hate me?" I asked softly. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "I just needed distance. Distance doesn't require betrayal." "It was never about you," she snapped. "It was about me surviving." The room fell into a sharp silence. "I would have given you the world," I said. "You didn't have to take it." She looked away. "You wanted me to build my life your way," she muttered. "No," I said, my voice trembling now. "I wanted you to build your life with me still in it. And that's when it happened." She laughed. A small, hollow sound, like something had died in her throat before it could become real. "You don't get it, do you?" she said. "You were always in it. You were in every decision I made, every voice in my head, every moment I doubted myself. You were so loud in my life even when you weren't speaking. I just needed peace." I stared at her heart shattering in slow motion. "I loved you so much," she added. "But it never felt like love back. It felt like expectation." I sat still, not trusting myself to speak. And then she said something I never imagined hearing from my own daughter. "You were never mine, Mom. You were always yours. Always so proud of your suffering, like it made you noble. But it just made me feel like a debt." Silence again. No storm, no screaming. Just truth, naked and raw. I stood slowly. "Then I won't make you owe me anything anymore," I said. "I release you from whatever you think I put on your shoulders, and I'll carry whatever weight is mine." She didn't respond. I walked out of that room with tears in my eyes, but my back straight. I cried in the car. Not because I was angry, not even because I was heartbroken, but because I finally understood she didn't just forge my name. She had rewritten who I was, and somewhere along the way, I had let her. I didn't sleep that night. Even the ticking of the kitchen clock felt like judgment. Each second whispered something I didn't want to hear. I kept replaying her words. "You were never mine, Mom. You were always yours." It sounded like a riddle I was never meant to solve. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to her neighborhood. Not to see her. To see him. Gregory. Her husband. Yes, the one who looked at me during dinners with forced courtesy, the one who always changed the subject when I brought up anything emotional. He opened the door with that same poker face. "Mrs. Pierce," he said with a small nod. I stood there for a moment. "Do you have a minute?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. The house felt different now, like it had absorbed the tension, the deception, the silence. Nothing warm lived in those walls anymore. We sat at the table, the same one I'd helped pick out when they first moved in. "I know she won't tell me everything," I began. "But you might?" He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he toyed with a coaster on the table. "I don't think it's my place." "That's convenient," I said more bitterly than I intended. He sighed. "She's been struggling for a long time. With me, with herself," he said softly. "But yeah, you're part of it. You always were." I said nothing. Then he added something that made my stomach twist. "She didn't tell you about the therapy notes, did she?" I blinked. "What notes?" He looked like he'd said too much. "She asked me to burn them after her sessions ended. But I didn't. I thought maybe one day she'd want to see how far she'd come." "Do you still have them?" He paused, then stood. 10 minutes later, he came back with a small box. Inside a few composition notebooks, the kind with black marbled covers and a bundle of typed pages stapled at the corner. He slid them across the table. "I shouldn't be doing this," he muttered, "but I think you deserve to know what she carried." I took the box home. For hours, I stared at it without opening it. Then, just before midnight, I took out the first notebook. The handwriting was hers. I would recognize it anywhere. Some entries were mundane her feelings after sessions, questions she wanted to ask her therapist. But then came the ones that felt like open wounds on paper. "I feel like I've been rehearsing for a role my whole life, the good daughter. But I hate the script. I hate that love comes with rules. When she hugs me, I freeze. I don't want to, but my body goes cold. Why does love from her feel like pressure? She gave me everything, but never asked me what I actually wanted." Each line chipped away at something inside me, and then buried in the middle of one of the pages I read this. I told her I needed space. What I meant was, I needed her to stop haunting every corner of my identity. I didn't want to become a woman who sacrifices everything and then demands sainthood for it. I closed the notebook, hands trembling. I wasn't angry. I was shattered. Because somewhere in my attempts to love her, protect her, guide her, I had become a shadow she was desperate to outrun. And she had lied. Not about money. Not even just about the forgery. She had lied for 2 years about who she was when she was with me. Wearing masks. Smiling when she hated the moment. Pretending. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time I didn't see a mother. I saw a ghost. A ghost of someone who had worked her hands raw, trying to build a better life for a daughter who only saw chains in those sacrifices. And what cut deepest was knowing that she might be right. Maybe I did give too much. Maybe I did confuse love with control, security with ownership, guidance with guilt. But I never lied. I never faked my affection. I never pretended to support her just to please appearances. And in that moment, I wished she had screamed at me years ago, thrown a glass, called me out. Because silence is a much crueler weapon. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor surrounded by her pain, inked in blue pen, one painful entry at a time. And for the first time since this began, I didn't cry out of self-pity. I cried because I realized I didn't know my daughter at all. The next morning, I didn't make coffee. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't even look at my phone. Instead, I opened the curtains and let the full light in, no soft filtering like I usually did. Let it hit every wrinkle on my face, every line carved from years of holding in the words I should have said. Then I opened my journal. Yes, I keep one too. Always have. But unlike hers, mine was filled with restraint. Short lines, to-do lists, grocery notes, memories without emotion. Today, I wrote something different. I spent my life trying to be her foundation, but I forgot to be my own. For the first time in years, I let myself write without editing. I wrote about the sacrifices, yes, but also the resentment I never dared admit. The moments I swallowed disappointment and smiled anyway. The loneliness of being needed but never known. I sat for 2 hours. Let the pen bleed. Then I did something radical. I packed a suitcase, 3 days worth of clothes, a book, my toothbrush, a scarf I hadn't worn since my husband's funeral. I didn't leave a note. I just got in the car and drove to the coast, a small motel near the cliffs. Nothing fancy, salt air and quiet. No one knew where I was, and that was the point. I needed to hear myself think without the echo of being someone's mother, without being the next phone call, the next emergency babysitter, the next guilt-laced thank you. I sat on the rocks the second evening looking at the waves smashing into the cliffside, and I remember thinking, this is what honesty looks like. Raw, relentless, unapologetic. That's when I realized something else. My daughter wasn't just lying to me. She was lying to herself. Because her words in those journals weren't cruel, they were desperate. A cry to become something beyond my reflection. And instead of helping her, I boxed her into the life I thought she wanted. But that didn't mean I deserved to be erased, or forged, or silenced. On the third morning, I received a text from Gregory. She knows you have the journals. She's shaken, wants to talk, but she's scared. She says she didn't mean for things to go this far. I stared at the screen for a long time, and then I replied, she can speak to me when she's ready to stop hiding. Until then, I'm not available, not angry, just finished being the one who always reaches first. For the rest of the day, I walked barefoot on the sand. Let the cold water sting my ankles. Let the wind tangle my hair. I didn't care. That night, I looked in the motel mirror and spoke out loud, I am not a ghost. I am not a martyr. I am not the villain in her story, and I won't let her be the villain in mine. It felt silly at first. But then something inside me cracked open. All these years I had tried to shape her story, now I finally stepped into mine. And that story, it wasn't about being the perfect mother. It was about being an honest woman. A woman who could love deeply, but also draw lines. A woman who could accept that her daughter might not need her anymore, but that didn't mean she deserved to be discarded like a worn-out coat. As I fell asleep that night, the tide crashed against the shore over and over. It sounded like forgiveness. Not hers. Mine. I returned on a Monday morning. No one to greet me. No text asking, "Where have you been, Mom?" No missed phone calls. Just an empty house, the clock ticking away as if time didn't care who was gone. I put down my suitcase and made myself a cup of peppermint tea. Not because I wanted to drink it, but because I needed something to make me feel alive. Then I opened my phone and scrolled through the calls and texts. Nothing from Amelia. Not a single line of inquiry. Even Gregory was silent. I waited 3 days, then a week, then 2. No text, no knock on the door. It was like a switch had been turned off forever. I had walked out of their lives and they left me alone. The months passed like shadows. I no longer counted the days, but the emptiness. No Sunday dinners. No phone calls interrupting the mealtime. Mommy Clara has a fever, are you free? No children's laughter echoing from the living room. The house became a museum of a mother who was once needed. And I began to doubt myself. Had I really hurt her? Was everything in that diary not a distortion, but a truth I had never dared to look at? But then I remembered the actions, not just the words. I remembered when I gave her the down payment on her first house, but she told her friends she could do it all herself. I remembered the times I picked Clara up while she was still at dinner with her coworkers, not saying thank you. I remember my birthday when she sent me a curt text. "Happy birthday, Mom. Too busy to come." And I still wrapped her birthday present every year, still called, still waited. At the end of that winter, I went for a routine checkup. The doctor said I had high blood pressure, probably from chronic stress. He said gently, "You need to take care of yourself, not just others." I nodded, but my heart sank. Because I didn't know who I was anymore, if not Amelia's mom. Then one day I went to the post office to mail Clara a Christmas present, not sure the address was still correct. The clerk said, "This guy has moved. The address is no longer valid." I stood frozen at the counter. No one told me. No goodbye. No apologies. Just a cold disappearance, as if I had never been a part of their story. One January evening, I sat by the window watching the snow fall. I no longer cried. No more anger. Just recognition. I was cut off. Not because I had done anything wrong in that moment, but because they needed someone to blame. And I, with my forgiving love, became a convenient target. I began to learn to live as a woman, not a mother. I signed up for art classes. I joined a reading group at the town library. I met other women who had also been abandoned by their children. We laughed, we told stories. No one judged anyone. There I was not the failed mother. I was just Marlene, a person learning to breathe again, to walk without someone's shadow. A year has passed. I don't know how tall Clara is. I don't know if she has lost any teeth. I don't know if Amelia is well. But I know I am alive, no more waiting. I was mindlessly scrolling through social media one early spring evening, not looking for anything in particular, just a habit I hadn't yet broken, like most lonely people. Then I saw it. A long post reshared by an old friend from Amelia's high school. Right from the first line, my heart dropped into my stomach. Some mothers hurt you not with fists, but with expectations so suffocating they crush your spirit. I knew that voice instantly. Even though she didn't use my name, every detail was unmistakable. I was forced to attend the college my mom could brag about to neighbors. I was never allowed to make mistakes, because even the tiniest misstep would earn me her quiet, brutal disappointment. Every word a dagger. She painted me as a perfectionist, someone who weaponized kindness, who tried to turn her daughter into a carbon copy of herself. She went on about how I supposedly banned her from dating, belittled her choices, and demanded silence just to avoid upsetting me. And then the closing lines, the ones that got over 400 likes and shares. I cut ties with my mother to protect my daughter from another generation of emotional toxicity. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the rightest. I couldn't breathe. I didn't even notice that I had curled up on the floor until my phone slipped out of my hand. It wasn't just the lies that crushed me. It was the fact that so many people believed them. The comments below pierced deeper than the post itself. "You're so brave. Cutting off toxic family is never easy." I see my own mom in this post. "Thank you for giving this pain a voice. You're healing not just for yourself, but for your daughter. You're a good mother." Me, the one who skipped meals to help her make car insurance payments at 23. Me, the one who slept on the floor for 3 weeks when she had Clara just to cook soups and rock the baby at 3 a.m. Me, the one who stayed silent when her husband called me too involved for asking if she was sleeping enough. Me, the villain now. Rewritten, reframed, made into a monster. No defense, no warning. I had already been tried and sentenced in a public court I didn't know existed. I typed a message to Amelia with trembling fingers. "Why would you do this? Why would you make me into some kind of monster? What did I ever do to you?" I hovered over send, then deleted it. Because deep down, I knew she wouldn't answer. And if she did, it would just be more justification, more rehearsed explanations, not truth. I didn't sleep for days. I stared at photos of Clara, she must be 6 now, and wondered how much her face had changed. Would she grow up thinking I was dangerous? Would she ever know who I truly was? What if one day she Googled me, and that post was all she saw, a lie disguised as healing, living on forever as truth? At a book club meeting, I broke down. Joni, a widow in her 70s with 2 grown sons, sat beside me. I told her everything. Every word of that post. Every memory it warped. She listened without judgment. Then she said something I'll never forget. They didn't write it right, but you still can. They built the stage, but you still have a voice. And trust me, someone out there wants to hear it. I went home and opened my laptop, and I started to write. Not to fight her, not to correct the record, but to tell the truth as I lived it, as I felt it. The truth I had swallowed for years. The first few pages were torture. I typed, I cried, I deleted, I tried again. But as the words came, I realized I wasn't entirely alone. An unexpected message arrived one night. It was from a woman who had seen Amelia's post. She wrote, "I didn't buy into everything your daughter wrote. There was something in your eyes, a kind of grief that couldn't be faked. I hope you tell your story one day." And I knew in that moment silence was never going to protect me. Only truth could. Spoken plainly, not to hurt, not to defend, but to finally be heard. I didn't expect to see her again, not for years, not unless it was at some lawyer's table or emergency room. But fate doesn't wait for readiness. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those golden spring days where everything feels too beautiful to hold sadness. I'd stepped into the downtown public library where I used to take Amelia as a child, back when her favorite smell was old pages and vanilla cookies. I walked past the community board and then I saw it. Healing Through Words, a memoir. Reading by Amelia Pierce, location room, B12, time today. 2:00 p.m. I checked my watch. 1:46. The air left my lungs. She had published something. A memoir. That meant her version of the story wasn't just a post now, it was a bound-edited permanent version of who I supposedly was. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I stood frozen for 3 minutes. And then, like a sleepwalker, I drifted down the hall and opened the door to room B12. There she was. On the small makeshift stage, holding a copy of her book, her hair swept back like she used to for college interviews. She wore soft pastels, her tone gentle, composed. Clara wasn't there, thank God. I don't think I could have survived that. I slipped into the back row behind a pillar nearly hidden. She didn't see me, and then she began to read. There's a certain kind of wound you inherit not just from what was said to you, but from what was never allowed to be said. Her voice was calm, almost poetic. She read passages I recognized, twisted versions of moments we shared. The time she failed her first math test and I told her, "You're smart enough to do better now." Retold as conditional love. The years she cried over a breakup and I made soup instead of asking questions, now reframed as emotional withdrawal. Each memory slightly bent, repainted with hurt. And then she said it. It took me 2 years of silence to feel safe again. And even now, part of me still wonders if she ever truly loved me at all, or just the version of me that didn't embarrass her. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood. I wasn't angry. I was devastated. Because she truly believed that. After the reading, the audience applauded, soft, thoughtful, affirming. A few women lined up to speak with her. She smiled politely, signed books, nodded. I waited, hidden. And then, as the crowd thinned, I stood up, and her eyes met mine. Her smile dropped. Everything in her posture changed, arms stiffened, breath caught. She didn't run, but she didn't approach either. I walked slowly toward her. Her hands tightened around her book like it might protect her. I stopped 3 feet away. No one else was near. "Amelia," I said quietly, "I read what you wrote." She didn't speak. I'm not here to argue with it. I'm not even here to ask for an apology. Still silent. I needed to see the person you are now. Not the one from the post. Not even the girl I raised. Just you. A long pause. Then she said, voice tight, "You shouldn't be here." "I know," I replied. "But I came because I finally understand something." She blinked. "All those years I thought I was protecting you by being quiet, by being strong, by not letting my worries show. I thought that's what a mother should be: dependable, unshakable. Her lip trembled, but she stayed silent. I see now that maybe you didn't need someone unbreakable. Maybe you just needed someone willing to break with you. Tears slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe them, but she didn't step forward either. After a moment, she turned away. That was all. Not forgiveness, not closure, just truth shared. And sometimes, that's all we get. I walked out of that room lighter, not because I had her back, but because I had finally said something I should have said 20 years ago. I had stopped waiting for her to come around and chosen instead to stand up and be seen, even if it was only for a moment. And strangely, that moment felt like the beginning of something. Not reconciliation, not yet. But maybe eventually, recognition. When I walked into the reading, I didn't expect much. A polite crowd, maybe a Q&A, applause. I hadn't seen the cover of the book, hadn't dared open it. I only knew the title, The Woman Who Raised Me with Silence. My heart was already halfway shattered just reading that line. The bookstore was crowded, buzzing with soft chatter and the smell of espresso. People browsed, laughing and flipping pages. No one noticed me, and that was good. I tucked into the back behind a shelf of cookbooks. Just a shadow watching. And then, she stepped up to the mic. Amelia, my daughter. Beautiful as ever, taller, more self-assured than the girl who used to fall asleep in my lap with smudged glasses and a head full of questions. She cleared her throat and started to read. When I was 9, I learned that love had a volume knob, and my mother kept hers turned down so low I wondered if I imagined it. My breath caught in my throat. She wasn't cruel. Cruelty at least has sharp edges you can brace against. No, she was soft. Soft in the way a fog is soft. She was absence. A woman who made dinners, folded laundry, and still made me feel like a guest in her life. I blinked fast. People were nodding. Some were murmuring things like powerful and so honest. But me, I was holding back tears like they were acid. At school, I'd watch the other moms kiss their kids on the cheek, call them honey, like it was a name. My mother called me Amelia, like a teacher taking attendance. She smiled, yes, but only with her mouth. She smiled with her mouth. My hands started trembling. I remembered the birthday cakes I made from scratch. The time I stayed up all night sewing her recital dress when the zipper broke. The nights I sat outside her door just in case her nightmares came back. Was all of it invisible to her? Or had I somehow failed so completely that only the gaps remained? People like to assume trauma comes from chaos, but there's a cruelty in quiet too. In always being told it's fine when your heart is breaking. In being raised by someone who looked at you like a beautiful mistake they didn't know how to fix. I wanted to leave. My legs ached to run. But I was glued to the floor. Because what if she was right? What if all my sacrifices, the missed dates, the overcooked dinners, the swallowed grief had been misread as distance? I'd always believed being stable was the best gift I could give her, that being calm and dependable would anchor her. But maybe she needed something louder. The day I left for college, she hugged me like a neighbor, not a mother saying goodbye. I remember thinking, if she cried, I'd believe she loved me. But her eyes were dry. So I packed my things and never looked back. That wasn't true. I cried in the kitchen, alone, holding the ceramic bowl she made in 6th grade. But I didn't chase her to the car, didn't cry in front of her, because I thought I was protecting her strength, because that's what my mother had done for me. The reading ended with applause. The crowd rose. A few women dabbed their eyes. She smiled as she signed books, and I stood there a ghost among strangers who now thought they knew me. It wasn't until I turned to leave that I heard a woman behind me whisper, "She must have had such a cold mother." I walked out before I could scream. That night, I sat in my car in the parking lot for nearly an hour. The rain tapped gently on the windshield, and for once I didn't turn on the radio. I thought about every moment I'd chosen silence over explanation, every time I'd smiled through pain, every bedtime when I said goodnight instead of "I love you," thinking it was implied. Maybe that was my crime, implying love instead of declaring it. And now the story of me, as told by the one person I gave my life to, was sealed in print. Her version, her lens, her grief. And I wasn't even allowed a footnote. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen, the house hollow around me, staring at the steam from my tea, until it disappeared like everything else I once believed was real. Her voice still echoed in my ears. A beautiful mistake she didn't know how to fix. Those words didn't just sting. They reconstructed my entire motherhood from the outside in, as if my daughter had lived in a house I never stepped foot in, even though I built it brick by brick, with my bare hands and quiet grief. I had to see her. Not for a fight, not for closure, but because I couldn't carry this distortion of me of us without breaking apart. I showed up at her apartment that afternoon. When she opened the door, her expression dropped. Mama. She didn't call me that often anymore. I nodded once. I read the book. Her face didn't fall in guilt. It didn't light up in pride. It just closed. Like a stage curtain, pulled down fast. You weren't supposed to? She started, then stopped. I didn't come to fight, I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. That old survival instinct. I just want to know if that's really how you see me. She didn't invite me in. She stepped outside and let the door fall softly shut behind her. I watched the small movement of her hands, her fingers twisting together just like when she was little, and trying to hide that she'd broken something. I needed to tell my truth, she said. I nodded. You're allowed. But she said quickly, eyes narrowing. No, but. I hesitated, then added, I just didn't know your truth erased mine. We stood in silence for a long moment. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept either. I told the truth as I remember it, she whispered. And maybe I told myself lies to survive? I replied. But I never stopped loving you, even if I was too quiet about it. You were always too quiet, she said sharply, the words scraping against the inside of my ribcage. I used to cry, and you'd just pat my shoulder and say, it'll pass. No hugs, no stories, just distance. I felt like I'd just been accused of abandoning her in a blizzard. I thought I was protecting you from my pain, I said. From the mess of what I was carrying. You were all I had left. I didn't want you to inherit the storm. You passed it on anyway, she snapped. Her voice cracked. That broke me more than her anger. I swallowed hard. You remember me as silent because I held everything in. But I was screaming on the inside, Amelia. I paused. The wind caught a dry leaf and spun it across the sidewalk between us. Your father's betrayal shattered me, and I never had time to grieve. You were so young, and I thought, if I kept moving, if I kept smiling, we'd be okay. Amelia blinked. You never talked about him. You never told me why he left. You let me imagine the worst. I didn't want you to think it was your fault. But I did, she whispered. For years. The air around us shifted, like the veil finally dropped between our versions of each other. She was no longer just the little girl who grew up resenting my silences. She was a woman with wounds she was finally brave enough to name. And I was no longer the villain in her book, just a mother who'd failed to speak when it mattered most. I wish you'd told me, she said quietly. I wish I had too, I replied. I thought being strong meant being quiet. But I see now. You needed my softness more than my strength. Amelia's lip trembled. For what it's worth, she said, writing that book didn't fix anything. It just made the silence louder. I didn't touch her. But I wanted to. Instead, I said, can we rewrite the ending? Maybe not for the book, But for us, she didn't answer. But she didn't walk away either. She just leaned against the brick wall beside me like two broken things still standing in place. I didn't expect forgiveness. Not that day. Maybe not ever. But her silence beside me that afternoon, the way she didn't slam the door, didn't turn her back. It was more mercy than I thought I deserved. We stood there until the light began to change, turning the street gold. And somewhere between the rustling leaves and the hum of traffic, Amelia spoke again. There's one chapter I didn't put in the book. That sentence made me turn my head sharply. She looked down. It was too personal, too raw. I wasn't ready to admit it, even to myself. I waited. She inhaled slowly and said, I remembered a night I must have been 8 or 9. I had a fever and I kept calling out. I don't think you slept at all. You sat with me the entire night singing softly. You thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. My heart thudded. I wanted to include that she continued, but the rest of the book, it needed a cleaner narrative. The cold mother, the silent home. That night didn't fit. She looked up at me, eyes shining, but I never forgot it. I had no words, only the sensation of something hot and painful climbing up my throat. How many memories like that had I hidden inside myself thinking they meant nothing to her? How many had she buried thinking they didn't belong in the version of me she'd built for survival? I whispered, I remember that night too. I know. We stood there for a moment, both of us blinking back years. She finally pushed off the wall and said, Come in, please. I followed her inside, heart thudding like I was entering my own house for the first time. Her apartment was cozy, a reflection of everything she never got to express in childhood: warm-toned furniture, scattered books, a blanket thrown carelessly on the couch. Lived in, real. She poured us tea like I used to, and we sat opposite each other, two women with the same eyes and a lifetime of silence between them. She asked questions not all at once, but gently, as if each one might bruise me. What really happened between you and Dad? Did you ever think of leaving too? Were you ever afraid I'd become like him? I answered, truthfully, for the first time in decades. I told her about the lies he'd spun, the long nights I cried into the laundry, the way I scrubbed dishes like they were the only thing I had control over. I told her how I begged him to stay, not for me, but for her, and how he looked right through me like I was invisible. I told her how the silence wasn't strength, it was survival, and how much I regretted that she had to grow up mistaking that survival for emotional distance. She didn't cry, but I could see her heart softening bit by bit like frost melting under sunlight. And then she surprised me. There's a second book, she said quietly. In progress. My eyebrows lifted. I want it to be about you, not the version I wrote to heal my side, but the version I never understood until now. I didn't know what to say, but I felt something move inside me, not pride, not forgiveness, but maybe the very first echo of peace. I don't want to be your project, I said softly, almost teasing. She smiled. You're not. You're the epilogue I didn't know I needed. We stayed like that until the tea cooled and the sky outside turned violet. As I stood to leave, Amelia walked me to the door. She hesitated, then reached out and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't long, but it was real, and it wasn't the kind of hug you give out of obligation. It was the kind you give when you realize the person you were angry at was just hurting too. As I stepped outside, she said something I'll never forget. You didn't fail me, Mama. You just forgot to let me in. I turned back and said, then let's both start remembering. And for the first time in years, I didn't walk away carrying silence. I carried hope. The weeks that followed felt like walking barefoot over broken glass. Not because Amelia went back to being cold, she didn't, but because kindness after years of distance felt sharp. We started small, phone calls every Sunday, shared recipes, photos of her cat Charlie doing ridiculous things. I would still brace myself every time her name lit up my screen, afraid it was all a temporary kindness, a detour before she disappeared again. But she didn't. In fact, it was her who suggested one afternoon, "You should come to the launch of the second book." I blinked. "You want me there?" She nodded. "You belong there." I wasn't ready, but I said yes. It took me 3 days to choose an outfit. Not because I wanted to look good, but because I didn't want to look like the ghost of a mother. The launch was small, intimate as she called it. A modest bookstore in the city with string lights and rows of folding chairs. When I walked in, no one stared. No one whispered. They just smiled. Amelia looked radiant, standing near the podium, a copy of her new book in hand. When she saw me, her face lit up with something I hadn't seen since she was little Pride. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. That look was everything. The reading began, and I'll never forget the first line. This is the story of a woman who wore silence like armor, who confused endurance with strength, and who taught me that pain unspoken is still pain carried. My breath caught. She didn't sugarcoat me. She didn't romanticize the years we lost. But she saw me, not as a villain, not even as a victim, as a whole person. And as she read, something inside me unclenched, not all at once, but enough to feel my own lungs again. After the reading, guests mingled. People congratulated her. Some glanced at me, then back at her. And I saw it the way they now linked us, not as writer and inspiration, but as daughter and mother. I stood near the refreshment table, gripping my cup, when a voice I hadn't heard in almost a decade slid into my ears. Still haunting the edges, Marlene, I turned. It was him. Richard. My ex-husband. Amelia's father. He looked older, yes. Thinner hair, deeper lines, but the smirk. It was the same. That condescending curl of the lip that used to make me doubt my worth with just a glance. I steadied myself. "I didn't expect to see you," I said evenly. He shrugged. "Got the invite from Amelia. Thought it might be interesting." I noticed the way his eyes scanned the room, not looking for her, but measuring everything. Still the same man, gathering leverage like oxygen. "She did all this," I said. "Without you." He chuckled. "Well, I suppose we all contribute in our own way." My jaw clenched. Before I could respond, Amelia appeared beside me. "Dad," she said flatly. He smiled, reaching to hug her. "You were brilliant, sweetheart." She took a step back. "Did you actually read the first book?" she asked, arms crossed. He blinked. "Well, I skimmed. I figured," she cut in. "Because if you had, you'd know the launch today isn't about you or what you think you contributed." She turned to me gently, taking my hand. "It's about her." I froze. Richard frowned. "You really think she was a saint?" "No," Amelia said. "But at least she never pretended she wasn't." And with that, she walked away, pulling me with her. I couldn't speak for a moment. My hand trembled in hers, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. She had chosen me. In public. Without shame. She didn't protect him. She didn't need his validation. She had reclaimed her voice. And this time, she'd used it for truth. And for the first time in my life, I realized something heartbreaking and beautiful. Sometimes the justice we long for doesn't come in courtrooms or confessions. It comes when the person we failed still finds a reason to defend our name. The night after the launch, I couldn't sleep. Not because of nerves, but because something inside me had settled, and I wasn't used to peace. I lay on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, reliving Amelia's words over and over. "It's about her." She didn't have to say it twice. The echo would stay with me the rest of my life. In the morning, I got a knock on my hotel room door. Amelia stood outside holding 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag. "Let's take a walk," she said. The park nearby was quiet that early. A breeze swept through the trees and our shoes crunched softly on the gravel path. She handed me a cup. You still drink it black? I smiled. Always. We walked for a while without speaking, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time, silence felt like a shared blanket, not a wall. Then, halfway through the path, she stopped. There's something I've never told you, she said, her voice almost a whisper. I looked at her, heart slowing. You remember those 2 years when I barely answered your calls? I nodded. How could I forget? She hesitated. Then it wasn't just the books or Dad, or trying to escape our past. She sat down on a nearby bench. I followed, careful not to break the tension. I was in therapy then, she said. I stayed quiet. I didn't go because of you. I went because I couldn't tell the difference between what happened to me and what I did to myself. I hated how I couldn't write anything real without tearing open something I hadn't healed. She looked at me now. Her eyes didn't blink. And part of that was you. I inhaled slowly. She continued. Not because you were cruel, but because you were gone, even when you were right there. Do you know how lonely that feels, Mom? To be a kid and know your mother is standing 5 feet away, but you can't reach her? I looked away. It wasn't defensiveness. It was grief. I remembered those years teaching all day, coming home exhausted, pretending everything was fine for her sake, even when I could barely afford groceries or stand on my own feet. I had been physically present, but emotionally buried. I don't blame you anymore, she said softly, but I needed to stop lying to myself about how that affected me. I nodded, finally turning back to face her. I understand. I know you tried, she said. And I know now that love doesn't always look like hugs and bedtime stories. Sometimes it looks like packed lunches and paid bills and staying, even when you wanted to disappear. I felt the tears before I could stop them. But this time I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. Because for once I wasn't crying from shame. I was crying from being seen. She pulled something out of the paper bag. A worn, hand-folded piece of paper. Remember this? I gasped. It was the letter. The one I had written her in high school and slipped under her door the night she caught me crying over an eviction notice. I had written, "You don't need to worry about me. You just need to be okay." I never knew if she'd read it. I carried it with me through 3 apartments, she said. And every time I thought you didn't love me, I read this. And I remembered. Maybe you just didn't know how to say it out loud. My hands trembled as I took it. I had forgotten my own words. She hadn't. I don't want to pretend we didn't mess up, she said. But I want to try now. Really try. I nodded. And for the first time in years, I said something that had been trapped in my throat far too long. I'm proud of you, Amelia. Not because you wrote books, but because you kept going even when I couldn't give you what you needed. She smiled through her own tears. And then, softly, I love you, Mom. I didn't answer right away, because some moments aren't meant to be rushed. Some truths need to land in silence first. Then I whispered, I love you too. A few weeks after I returned home, a package arrived at my door. There was no note, just a hardback book, its cover still warm from the summer sun. It was Amelia's newest manuscript. She hadn't said she was working on anything not since the memoir. But when I opened the first page, I saw my name. From Arlene, who gave me roots, even when the soil was broken. I had to sit down. The story wasn't about me, not directly. It followed a young woman, daughter of a stoic mother, navigating a world that didn't quite see her pain, only her strength. There were scenes that mirrored our life together. Small things. The way the mother saved old receipts in shoeboxes, how she always cut toast diagonally, how she'd hum when she was anxious. None of that had ever made it into Amelia's books before. But now there we were. Not as villains or martyrs, just people flawed and fumbling but trying. That night I sat on the porch with a cup of tea watching the sun drop behind the trees. It felt strange. to sit with nothing aching inside me. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had stopped fighting the past. I realized something I'd never allowed myself to feel before: I didn't fail as a mother. I simply mothered with the tools I had at the time. Yes, I had been silent when I should have spoken. Yes, I had shut doors out of fear instead of faith. But I stayed. And sometimes staying is the act of love, not leaving even when you're invisible. Amelia called that night. I signed the contract, she said. They want to publish in spring. I'm proud of you, I said again, and meant it more than ever. There was a pause. Then she added, I've been thinking about coming home next month. Just for a few days. No press. Just us. My heart swelled, not in excitement but in relief. The kind of relief that comes when you realize you're no longer alone in your memories. I'd love that, I said. After the call, I walked to my old photo drawer. There was a picture I hadn't looked at in years, one I used to avoid. It was from her 5th grade play. She was dressed as a tree of all things, face-flushed hair tied back in a messy ponytail. I had taken it with a disposable camera after running from work in the rain just to make it in time. I remember feeling ashamed that day because I came late, because my shoes squeaked, because I couldn't afford the flowers like the other moms brought. But looking at the picture now, she was smiling. She was looking at me, and suddenly it hit me. She didn't need the flowers. She needed me to show up. And I did. Maybe awkwardly, maybe quietly. But I was there. That had always been enough, even when we both forgot it. So here we are. A mother. A daughter. 2 years of silence broken not by screaming but by stories. 2 lifetimes of grief stitched back together through one difficult truth. We both hurt. And we both wanted to be seen. In the end, her biggest lie wasn't to me. It was to herself that she didn't need me anymore. And my biggest mistake wasn't the silence. It was thinking I didn't deserve to be forgiven. So now I hold that truth gently, not as a weapon, but as a bridge between who we were and who we're still becoming. If this story stirred something in you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever healed something broken through honesty? Don't forget to subscribe to Grace's Truth for more cinematic true stories like this.